The crystal chandelier sparkled overhead at the Grand Plaza Hotel's annual charity gala, where Silicon Valley's elite gathered in their finest attire. Alexander Reed stood near the open bar, his custom-made Italian suit setting him apart from even this wealthy crowd. At 35, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the room, having built his tech empire from scratch. "Another boring charity event," remarked James Chen, Alexander's longtime friend and fellow tech mogul, swirling a whiskey. "We write checks, pat ourselves on the back, and nothing really changes." Alexander nodded absent-mindedly, checking his phone for the 100th time that evening. Running Retech Industries meant he was never truly off duty. The company's latest artificial intelligence project was behind schedule, and his mind kept drifting to tomorrow's meetings. "You know what your problem is, Alex," called out Marcus Davidson, another billionaire in their circle, as he joined them. "You've got all the money in the world, but you're too predictable. When's the last time you did something crazy?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Some of us prefer to be responsible with our success." "Responsible?" "More like boring," Marcus laughed, drawing attention from nearby guests. "I bet you couldn't step out of your comfort zone if your life depended on it." James's eyes lit up with sudden interest. "Are we making bets?" "Because I'd love to see Mr. Perfect here do something truly unexpected." Alexander straightened his tie, irritation creeping into his voice. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone." "Afraid?" Marcus taunted, knowing exactly how to push Alexander's buttons. They'd known each other since their early startup days, and Marcus knew Alexander never backed down from a challenge. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Alexander asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Marcus grinned, scanning the room as if searching for inspiration. His eyes landed on a news headline scrolling across a nearby TV screen about homelessness in the city. "I got it," he said, his voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private. "Marry a homeless person." "What?" Alexander nearly choked on his drink. "You heard me," Marcus continued, warming to his idea. "Find a homeless person and marry them. Stay married for 6 months. No tricks, no hiding them away in some apartment, a real marriage." James joined in, excitement building. "If you do it, we'll each donate $50 million to your favorite charity. That's $100 million for the cause of your choice." Alexander stared at his friends, wondering if they'd lost their minds. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Marcus replied. "Think about it. $100 million could do real good, build shelters, fund programs, make actual change." "Unless you're not up for it." Alexander's mind raced. $100 million could indeed make a significant impact. He thought of all the charitable projects he wanted to fund but hadn't found the right moment. This could be his chance to do something truly meaningful. "What's the catch?" he asked, his business instincts kicking in. "No catch," James said. "Find someone homeless, marry them legally, live as husband and wife for 6 months. Simple as that. But it has to be the first homeless person you meet when you go looking, no shopping around." "And if I do this, you'll both write checks for $50 million each?" Alexander clarified. "We'll even put it in writing," Marcus offered. "Draw up a contract tomorrow, make it all official." Alexander took a long sip of his drink, weighing the proposition. It was crazy, possibly even unethical, but $100 million could change thousands of lives. And 6 months? He could do anything for 6 months. "Fine," he said finally. "Draw up the contract. But I want everything spelled out clearly, the donation amounts, the terms, everything." Marcus and James exchanged triumphant looks. "I honestly didn't think you'd agree," James admitted. "First thing tomorrow morning, we'll get the lawyers involved," Marcus said, raising his glass to Alex's upcoming marriage. As they clinked glasses, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that he had just agreed to something that would change his life forever. He pulled out his phone and canceled all his meetings for the next day. Tomorrow, he would begin his search for a spouse in the most unlikely of places, the streets of San Francisco. Little did Alexander know, this bet would lead him to discover something far more valuable than money could ever buy, and his life would never be the same again. The morning sun cast long shadows across San Francisco's streets as Alexander drove his Mercedes through the city's rougher neighborhoods. He had traded his usual suit for jeans and a simple sweater, trying to look less conspicuous. After 3 hours of searching, he was about to give up when he spotted a well-maintained but old Honda Civic parked in a library parking lot. What caught his attention wasn't the car itself but the woman sitting in the driver's seat, reading a book to two small girls. Even from a distance, he could see how clean and neat they appeared despite their circumstances. The girls wore matching school uniforms, their hair neatly braided. Alexander parked his car and watched. The woman looked to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Every few minutes, she would pause her reading to explain something to the twins, who listened with complete attention. When the story ended, the woman helped the girls pack their backpacks. Alexander noticed how she checked their homework and straightened their uniforms before walking them to the library entrance. He got out of his car and followed them inside. The scene inside the library surprised him even more. The woman led the girls to a study area where several other children were working. She spoke briefly with a librarian who clearly knew them well, then settled the twins at a table with their schoolwork. "Mommy has to look for jobs today," she told them softly. "Be good for Miss Thompson, okay?" Alexander watched as she went to the library's computer area. Making his decision, he approached her just as she sat down at a terminal. "Excuse me," he said quietly, mindful of the library setting. The woman looked up, her green eyes showing immediate wariness. "Can I help you? My name is Alexander Reed. I noticed you and your daughters outside." She stiffened, positioning herself to keep her daughters in view. "We're not doing anything wrong. The library is a public space." No, Alexander said quickly. "I have a rather unusual proposition for you. Would you be willing to talk? Maybe over coffee?" She studied him carefully. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I don't go anywhere with strangers, especially not with my girls nearby." Alexander respected her caution. "What if we sit right there?" He pointed to some tables within clear view of her daughters. "I promise, what I have to say will be worth your time." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Once seated, Alexander decided directness was best. "I know you're homeless. I saw you in your car." "We're not homeless," Sarah replied firmly. "We're temporarily between homes. My daughters still attend school. They're clean, well-fed, and doing excellent in their studies." Alexander admired her dignity. "I can see that. They seem like wonderful girls. How old are they?" "Emma and Olivia are 6, Sarah said, her eyes softening when she looked at her daughters. "Now, what's this proposition?" Alexander took a deep breath. "This will sound crazy, but please hear me out. I need to get married." Sarah's expression turned to stone. "I'm not interested in any inappropriate arrangements." "It's not what you think," Alexander explained quickly. He told her about the bet, the charity money, and the 6-month requirement. Everything would be legal and proper. "You and your daughters would have a safe home, and when it's over, I'll make sure you're all set up independently." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You're right. That is crazy. You're either lying or insane." "Google me," Alexander suggested. Alexander Reed, CEO of Retech Industries. "Everything I'm telling you is true." Sarah pulled out an old smartphone and searched. Her eyes widened as she read. "You really are him," she said, looking back at her daughters, then at Alexander. "Why would a billionaire make such a bet?" "Honestly? Pride, stubbornness, and the chance to help people with that charity money," he admitted. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughters study. Finally, she turned back to Alexander. And this is a big if, I considered this, I would have conditions." "Many conditions." Alexander felt a spark of hope. "Name them." "Not here," Sarah said. "Meet me back here tomorrow at 10. I'll have a list ready." She stood up, straightening her worn but clean jacket. "And Mr. Reed, if this is some kind of joke or trick, remember that even homeless mothers can have good lawyers. As Alexander watched her return to her daughters, he realized this arrangement might be more challenging than he anticipated. But something about Sarah Mitchell's dignity, intelligence, and fierce devotion to her daughters told him he'd made the right choice. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the library 15 minutes early, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He found Sarah already waiting, a notebook in her hand. Her daughters were nowhere in sight. "They're at school," Sarah explained, accepting the coffee. "I found a friend to drop them off today. I wanted to talk privately." They sat at the same table as yesterday. Sarah opened her notebook, revealing a detailed list written in neat handwriting. "First condition," she began, her voice firm. "The charity money goes specifically to programs helping homeless families with children. I want oversight on how it's spent." Alexander nodded, impressed by her focus on helping others. "Agreed. What else?" "My daughters come first always. They keep their current school, their routine stays as normal as possible, and we don't tell them about the bet. Ever." Sarah's eyes challenged him to disagree. "Of course," Alexander said. "I wouldn't want to upset them." Sarah continued, "I maintain my independence. I want my own bank account, my own car, and I continue my job search. This isn't about becoming a trophy wife." "That's reasonable," Alexander agreed. "Though you won't need to live in your car anymore. I have a house in Pacific Heights." "About that," Sarah said. "I want a prenuptial agreement. When this ends in 6 months, I don't want your money, just enough to secure a stable future for my girls. College funds, a modest house, that's all." Alexander leaned back, studying her. "Most people would demand more." "I'm a mother," she replied simply. "Now, about the marriage itself. We'll need a story for how we met. I suggest keeping it simple, say we met through mutual friends." "Good thinking," Alexander said. "What about living arrangements?" "Separate bedrooms," Sarah said firmly. "We'll present a united front in public, but privately, we keep our distance. No romantic expectations." Alexander found himself respecting her more with each condition. "Agreed. Anything else?" Sarah hesitated, then said, "Yes. I want to work at your company." This surprised him. "You want a job at Retech?" "I have an MBA from Stanford and 5 years of financial experience. I'm not asking for special treatment, I'll interview like anyone else. But I need to rebuild my career." Alexander was curious now. "Why haven't you mentioned your education before?" Sarah's expression darkened. "That's another condition. Don't ask about my past." "Not yet." Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Speaking of the bet," he said, showing Sarah the message, "my friends want to meet you. They've arranged dinner tonight to sign the contracts." Sarah took a deep breath. "Fine. But first, we need to get my daughters. School ends in an hour, and they'll need to know about some changes in their life." They drove separately to the school, Sarah in her Honda, Alexander in his Mercedes. Watching her greet her daughters in the pickup line, he saw how their faces lit up at her arrival. She gathered them close, whispered something, and pointed to Alexander. The twins approached his car shyly. "Mommy says you're her friend," one said. "And that we might stay at your house," the other added. Alexander knelt down to their level. "That's right. I'm Alexander. Would you like to see the house? There's a big backyard with a swing set." The girls looked at each other, then at their mother. When Sarah nodded, they smiled. "Can we go now?" "First," Sarah said, "Alexander and I have a dinner meeting. Mrs. Chun from next door will watch you tonight. Tomorrow, we'll all visit the house together." As they drove away, Sarah in her car with the twins, Alexander felt oddly nervous about the dinner ahead. His friends would be expecting him to have found someone desperate, someone easy to control. Instead, he found a woman who just negotiated terms like a seasoned CEO. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was his lawyer confirming the prenup was ready. Everything was moving quickly now, becoming real. Alexander watched Sarah's car turn the corner, wondering what other surprises she had in store. Tonight, his friends would meet the woman he was about to marry. Something told him they were in for quite a shock. The upscale restaurant hummed with quiet conversation as Alexander and Sarah walked in for dinner. She wore a simple black dress that Alexander suspected was her only formal outfit, yet she carried herself with such grace that no one would guess she'd been living in her car just days ago. Marcus and James were already seated at a private table, their expressions changing from amusement to surprise as they saw Sarah. They clearly expected someone different. "Gentlemen," Alexander said, pulling out a chair for Sarah, "meet my fiancée, Sarah Mitchell." "A pleasure," Sarah said smoothly, her voice carrying the polished tone of someone used to business dinners. Both men straightened unconsciously in response. As they ordered drinks, Alexander noticed James studying Sarah intently. Suddenly, James's eyes widened with recognition. "Wait a minute," he said. "Sarah Mitchell, from Goldman Stanley? The whistleblower?" Sarah's hand tightened on her water glass, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, that was me." Alexander turned to her in surprise. The Goldman Stanley scandal had been huge news 3 years ago, a massive fraud scheme uncovered by an insider who sacrificed everything to expose the truth. "You never mentioned this," Alexander said quietly. "It wasn't relevant to our arrangement," Sarah replied, but her voice held a tremor. Marcus leaned forward, fascinated. "I remember that case. The firm lost billions, but didn't they clear the whistleblower of any wrongdoing?" "They did," Sarah said. "But being legally right doesn't always protect you. The banking world is small, and some people have long memories." "That's how you ended up." Alexander didn't finish the sentence. Sarah nodded. "They blacklisted me from every major financial institution. My savings went to legal fees. Then my ex-husband used the scandal to get custody of our house in the divorce. The girls were all I had left." The lawyers arrived before anyone could respond, carrying contracts for both the marriage agreement and the charity donation. As they reviewed the documents, Alexander watched Sarah read every line carefully, asking precise questions that revealed her financial expertise. Later, as they waited for their main course, James asked, "So, what made you agree to this unusual arrangement?" Sarah looked at him steadily. "When you've hit rock bottom, you learn to recognize genuine opportunities. Alexander's offer wasn't just about money, it was a chance to rebuild, to give my daughters stability." "But surely you could have found another job," Marcus pressed. "With your qualifications?" "Try explaining a 3-year employment gap in banking," Sarah said dryly. "Especially when Google shows you as the person who cost your previous employer billions." The twins' father stopped paying child support, claiming business losses. "I took temporary jobs, but it was never enough for rent in San Francisco." Alexander listened, pieces falling into place. Her determination to work at Retech, her insistence on independence, her careful handling of the charity money, it all made sense now. The lawyers finished their work, and everyone signed. It was official: Alexander and Sarah would marry next week, and in return, Marcus and James would donate $100 million to homeless family programs. As they left the restaurant, Sarah turned to Alexander. "Now you know my past. Does it change anything?" Alexander thought about the woman who'd lost everything to do what was right, who kept her daughters in school while living in a car, who faced down 2 billionaires over dinner without flinching. "Yes," he said. "It changes things. I'd like to offer you a job." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I told you I don't want special treatment." "This isn't charity," Alexander said. "Retech needs a new head of financial compliance, someone with both expertise and proven integrity. The position reports directly to the board, not to me, so there's no conflict of interest." Sarah stopped walking. "You're serious?" "The interview is Monday at 9 a.m. Don't be late," Alexander smiled. "And Sarah, thank you for trusting me with your story." As they walked to their cars, both lost in thought, neither noticed Marcus and James watching them from the restaurant window. Well, Marcus said, that didn't go as expected. James nodded. No, it didn't. I think our friend may have gotten more than he bargained for with this bet. They watched Alexander open Sarah's car door, saw the careful distance both maintained even in this simple gesture. It looked less like a bizarre arrangement now and more like the beginning of something neither party had anticipated. Monday morning arrived with Sarah sitting in Riteka's waiting room, dressed in a borrowed suit from her new neighbor. The weekend had been a whirlwind of moving into Alexander's house, with the twins delighting in their new rooms while Sarah tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. The interview panel consisted of 3 board members and the company's legal counsel. Sarah noticed they had copies of her old Goldman Stanley files on their tablets. Mrs. Mitchell, the head of the board, began, "Your history is interesting." "Call me Ms. Mitchell," Sarah corrected politely. "The marriage hasn't happened yet." For the next hour, Sarah demonstrated her expertise, outlining her vision for strengthening Riteka's compliance systems. She was in the middle of explaining a risk assessment strategy when Alexander burst into the room, his face pale. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but we have a situation. The SEC is here." The room erupted in confusion. Securities and Exchange Commission surprise visits were never good news. "They're asking about the Mindtech acquisition," Alexander continued. "Something about irregular financial patterns." Sarah's head snapped up. "Mindtech? When did Riteka acquire them?" 2 years ago, Alexander replied. "Why?" Sarah opened her laptop quickly. "Because Mindtech was a key player in the Goldman Stanley fraud. I never knew who bought them." After the scandal, the board members gathered around as Sarah pulled up her old files. Here, she pointed to a complex diagram. Mindtech was laundering money through a series of shell companies. "I could never prove where all the money went, but some of it might have ended up in Riteka's acquisition." Alexander finished, understanding dawning on his face. Sarah nodded. "The fraud was like a spider web. I only exposed part of it before they shut me down." The legal counsel spoke up. "Can you help us handle the SEC?" "Only if you give me full access to the acquisition files," Sarah replied. "And I'll need a team." Alexander made a quick decision. "You're hired. Whatever resources you need are yours." The next 12 hours were intense. Sarah set up in a conference room, surrounding herself with financial records and computer screens. She worked with a focus that impressed even Alexander, who was known for his own work ethic. Around midnight, she found it. "Look at this," she called to Alexander, who had stayed to help. The money trail. Mindtech's former CEO hid the fraudulent funds in legitimate-looking investments, then used them to artificially inflate the company's value before selling to Riteka. "We paid too much," Alexander realized, "by millions." "The good news is Riteka was an innocent party," Sarah said. "The bad news is you'll need to cooperate with the new SEC investigation." Alexander studied her carefully. "You seem almost happy about this." Sarah smiled for the first time in hours. "This is my chance to finish what I started, to expose the entire fraud, not just pieces of it." The next morning, Sarah presented her findings to the SEC investigators. Her detailed knowledge of the original case proved invaluable, and by afternoon, the focus had shifted from investigating Riteka to reopening the larger fraud case. As the SEC team left, promising to return with subpoenas for the real culprits, Alexander found Sarah in her new office. "The board just voted," he said. "You're officially our head of financial compliance, with a special assignment to help the SEC investigation." Sarah looked around her office, with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. "3 days ago, I was living in my car, and now you're taking down financial criminals again." "Life is strange," Alexander said. "Speaking of strange," Sarah replied, "we're getting married tomorrow." They looked at each other awkwardly, both aware of how their relationship had shifted. What had started as a bizarre business arrangement now felt different, complicated by mutual respect and shared purpose. "About that," Alexander began, but Sarah's phone rang. "The twins' school," she said, gathering her things. "I need to pick them up. Emma has a dance recital tonight, remember?" Alexander nodded, watching her leave. He thought about how she'd saved his company millions today, how she'd faced down the SEC without flinching, yet still made sure to attend her daughter's recital. The bet that had seemed so simple was becoming increasingly complex, and somewhere between the corporate crisis and the dance recital, Alexander realized he was starting to forget it was just a bet at all. 1 month into their marriage, Alexander found himself sitting in a small school auditorium, watching Emma and Olivia in their class play. The twins had the lead roles as forest fairies, and their faces beamed with excitement under their glitter makeup. "They've never been happier," Sarah whispered beside him. "The drama teacher says they're natural performers." Alexander nodded, surprised to realize he had rearranged 3 important meetings to be here. A month ago, nothing would have pulled him away from work. Now, watching the twins dance across the stage, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. After the play, as they walked to the car with 2 tired but happy little girls, Emma tugged at Alexander's sleeve. "Did you really like it, Alex?" "You were both amazing," he said honestly. "How about ice cream to celebrate?" Olivia's eyes widened. "But Mom says no sweets after 7. Sarah laughed. "I think we can make an exception for star performers." At the ice cream shop, Alexander watched the twins share a banana split while telling him about their upcoming science fair project. They needed to build a model solar system, and they were determined to make it special. "Can you help us, Alex?" Olivia asked. "Mom says you're good with building things." "Of course," he found himself saying. "We can work on it this weekend." Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Sarah found Alexander in his home office, looking at pictures from the play on his phone. "You didn't have to cancel your meetings today," she said. "I wanted to be there," he replied simply. Then, hesitating, "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about the SEC investigation." Sarah sat down, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "We traced more of the money trail. Some of it leads to your ex-husband's company." Sarah's face paled. "David was involved?" "It looks like he knew about the fraud before you exposed it. That's why he rushed the divorce, why he fought so hard for the house, he was hiding assets." Sarah's hands trembled slightly. "All this time, he claimed he couldn't pay child support because I ruined his business, but he was part of it." Alexander moved to sit beside her. "The SEC will arrest him tomorrow. I wanted you to hear it from me first." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "The girls haven't seen their father in months. He keeps canceling visits. I guess now I know why." "Are you okay?" "I'm angry," she admitted. "Not about the money or the house, but about what he put the girls through. They blamed themselves when he stopped visiting." Alexander thought about the twins' faces lighting up during their performance, how they looked to him now for approval and attention. Without realizing it, he had stepped into a role their father had abandoned. "The girls will be fine," he said. "They have you." He paused, surprised by his next words. "And they have me too, if you're okay with that." Sarah looked at him curiously. "That only requires you to be married to me, not to be a father to my children." "I know," Alexander said. "But helping with homework, attending school plays, building science projects, it doesn't feel like an obligation anymore." The conversation was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. "Mommy, I had a bad dream." It was Emma, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Without thinking, Alexander scooped her up. "Want to tell us about it?" Emma snuggled against his shoulder, already half asleep again. "Can I stay here for a little while?" Sarah watched as Alexander settled into a chair with Emma, speaking softly to her about happy things until she drifted off. This wasn't part of their arrangement, wasn't part of the bet. This was something else entirely. "I'll take her back to bed," Alexander whispered, standing carefully to not wake Emma. Sarah followed them upstairs, watching as Alexander tucked Emma in and checked on Olivia too. When had this become so natural? When had they started feeling like a real family? Back in the hallway, Alexander looked slightly embarrassed. "I hope I'm not overstepping." "You're not," Sarah assured him. The girls adore you, and you're good with them. They stood there awkwardly, both aware that something had shifted in their carefully arranged marriage. The bet that had brought them together seemed less and less important with each passing day. Neither spoke about it, but both felt it, the unexpected warmth of family, the comfort of belonging, and the growing fear of what would happen when their 6 months were up. 3 months into their marriage, the SEC investigation made headlines across the country. Sarah's original whistleblowing had only revealed part of the fraud. Now, the full scheme was exposed, and dozens of executives were facing charges, including her ex-husband. Alexander watched Sarah handle press conferences with grace, telling her story not as a victim but as someone who'd stood up for what was right. Her reputation was restored, and job offers started pouring in from top companies. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching the twins play on their swing set, Sarah handed Alexander an envelope. "What's this?" he asked, opening it to find a resignation letter. "Morgan Stanley offered me a position as their global head of compliance," she explained. "Full benefits, excellent salary, everything I worked for before the scandal." Alexander felt his heart sink. "You're leaving Retech?" "I haven't decided yet," Sarah said softly. "The girls are happy here. They love their school, their friends." She paused. "And you?" Before Alexander could respond, Olivia ran up to them. "Alex, can you push me on the swing? Emma's not doing it right." "She's doing it perfectly fine," Emma called from the swing set. "You're just too picky." Alexander laughed and got up. "I'll push both of you. Deal?" As he pushed the giggling twins on the swings, Sarah watched them, thinking about how different their lives were now. The girls no longer asked about their father, and she'd overheard them telling friends that Alex is better than a dad because he chose us. Later that night, after family dinner, which had become a nightly tradition, Alexander found Sarah in the library, working on her laptop. "The twins asked if we could go camping next weekend," he said, sitting across from her. Sarah looked up, amused. "You? Camping?" "I've never been," he admitted. "But they showed me pictures in their science book of constellations, and now they want to see real stars." Alexander Reed, billionaire tech CEO, sleeping on the ground, Sarah teased. "What would your friends say?" "They'd probably add it to the list of ways I've changed," he said seriously. "Sarah, about the Morgan Stanley offer." "I haven't accepted it," she interrupted. "I'm not sure I want to go back to that world. Retech feels different. The work we're doing with the charity money, helping homeless families, it matters." Alexander moved to sit beside her. "You know you don't have to stay because of the bet. You've more than proven yourself." Sarah closed her laptop. "Is that what you think? That I'm staying because of our arrangement? Aren't you?" Alexander looked around. She gestured to the library, where the twins' homework was spread across one table, their family photos now mixed with his business awards on the shelves. This stopped being about the bet a long time ago. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Speaking of the bet," he said, showing Sarah the message, "they want to have dinner tomorrow. Apparently, they have something important to discuss." Sarah nodded. "We should go. We're coming up on the 4-month mark." The next evening at dinner, Marcus and James seemed unusually serious. "We've been watching you too," Marcus said. "This isn't what we expected." "What do you mean?" Alexander asked. James leaned forward. "We thought this would be a business arrangement. Instead, you've become a real family. The charity work you're doing, the changes in both of you. We want to release you from the bet," Marcus finished. "You don't have to stay married for the full 6 months. We'll still donate the money." Alexander and Sarah looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations that had become common over the months. "What if we want to stay married?" Alexander asked quietly. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. Marcus and James exchanged knowing looks. "Then maybe this bet wasn't such a bad idea after all," James said. On the drive home, neither Alexander nor Sarah mentioned his words at dinner. But when they arrived, finding the twins waiting up to show them their finished science project, they shared a look that said everything they hadn't spoken aloud. The bet had brought them together, but something stronger was keeping them there. The only question was, would they admit it to each other before their time ran out? As the 6-month mark approached, Alexander found himself unable to sleep. He stood in the kitchen at midnight, making hot chocolate a habit he'd picked up from the twins. The house felt different now, filled with family photos, children's artwork, and the comfortable chaos of home. "Can't sleep either?" Sarah's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, wearing the worn Stanford sweatshirt she refused to replace despite having a new wardrobe. "Want some?" he offered, holding up the hot chocolate. They sat at the kitchen island, the same place where they'd had countless family breakfasts and homework sessions. Tomorrow was their last official day of the marriage contract. "The girls asked me something interesting today," Sarah said, warming her hands on her mug. "What's that?" "They wanted to know if we'd still be a family after tomorrow." Sarah watched his reaction carefully. "I didn't know how to answer them." Alexander set his mug down. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. That day at the library, when I first saw you reading to the twins, I knew you were different. The bet stopped mattering weeks ago." "Alexander, please let me finish," he interrupted. "I used to think success meant bigger deals, more money, fancier houses. Then you and the girls showed me what really matters: family dinners, school plays, camping trips. Even that time Emma got sick, and we spent all night in the emergency room." Sarah smiled at the memory. "You were so worried about her fever." "Because I love her. I love both of them. And Sarah," he took a deep breath, "I love you." The kitchen fell silent. Outside, a car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating their faces. "I know this started as a business arrangement," Alexander continued, "but somewhere between morning carpools and bedtime stories, it became real. At least for me." Sarah stood up and walked to the refrigerator, where Emma's latest art project hung, a drawing of all 4 of them, labeled "My Family." "When we were homeless," she said quietly, "I promised the girls I'd give them a better life. I thought that meant money, stability, education. But they got something more here, they got love." She turned to face him. "I rejected the Morgan Stanley offer yesterday." "You did?" "Because I don't want to leave. Not Retech, not this house, and especially not you." Sarah moved closer. "I love you too, Alexander. I think I have for months." Before they could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. The twins appeared, sleepy-eyed but determined. "We knew you'd be up," Emma said. "We can't sleep," Olivia added. Alexander lifted them both onto the kitchen counter. "And why is that?" "Because tomorrow everything might change," Emma said seriously. "We don't want you to stop being our family," Olivia whispered. Alexander looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly. "Actually," he said, "we need to tell you something important. How would you feel if we stayed a family forever? Not because of any agreement, but because we want to." The twins' faces lit up. "Really?" they asked in unison. "Really," Sarah confirmed. "If that's what you want." Instead of answering, the girls launched themselves at Alexander, nearly knocking him over with their hugs. Sarah joined them, and for a long moment, they stood together in the kitchen, holding each other. "Can we have hot chocolate too?" Emma asked finally. "Just this once," Sarah laughed, wiping happy tears from her eyes. Later, after the twins were back in bed, Alexander and Sarah sat on the porch swing, watching the stars. "We should tell Marcus and James," Sarah said. "Tell them what?" "That their bet to humiliate me ended up giving me everything I never knew I wanted?" "Exactly that," Sarah smiled. "Though maybe we'll leave out the humiliation part." Alexander took her hand. "You know, we could have a real wedding now, one the girls can be in." "I'd like that," Sarah said. "But this time, no bets." "No bets," Alexander agreed. "Just love." Inside their home was quiet but full of life, homework on the table, toys in the corner, family photos on the walls. The bet that brought them together had ended, but their real story was just beginning. And somewhere in San Francisco, two billionaires would soon receive wedding invitations, proof that sometimes the best investments aren't measured in money at all, but in the love of a family that found each other against all odds. Subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.